Namaste, Ammaji. Today we've got chapter 5, Back to Earth. As per our plan, we travelled to Greece for the winter, seeking the sun, moving as far south as we could go and still remain in Europe, to the island of Crete. There, in a small fishing village on the Mediterranean Sea, we rented a tiny house, bought a few cooking utensils and settled down to the cold weather had passed. The village was 10 kilometres by foot from the nearest market. Only a few foolhardy cars came round the sharp mountain bends, and surely never a bus. There was no electricity, no running water. The villagers lived as they must have lived 1,000 years before, except they had a radio and a few small knickknacks the modern world had left behind. The stillness was good for us. There were sounds enough, the bleating of sheep and goats, the early morning chirping of large numbers of birds, the squeal of pigs, the crow of roosters, and the sounds of the surf hitting the shores. The silence held as though it were the basic fabric, and all the sounds simply designs upon it, decorative. The villagers fought and laughed and shouted and cried, and the emotions tumbled one over the other, and none remained in a steady state. There were the permanent hatreds, the feuds between families, without which no Greek village could polarize itself. Those turbulent emotions erupted, we had heard, occasionally in maimings and murders. But the people had a curious sparkle in their eyes, took a delight in the simple events of their lives. Whenever I talked with Varvara, the wife of the owner of the village's sole cafe, Varvara would moan and roll her eyes upward and curse her husband and mother-in-law and the barren earth for the immense difficulties of her life. But whenever I watched her out of the corner of my eye, that same miserable Varvara was laughing and teasing and giggling, exclaiming over the sweet taste of the freshly plucked orange, or clucking her grandson on her knee with unbearable pride. I enjoyed addressing the men of the village as Aristotle, Socrates, and Sophocles, rough, unhewn, handsome in their dark, proud way. Something was still there in their blood, something filtered down from that glorious past. A little is good, too much is not good, a young shepherd boy named Euphipides said to me. Yes, moderation in all things, I would agree. Joannes, I asked another of the goat herd boys, just you and your wife live up in the cave over that third mountain? Just the two of you? Sometimes you don't come down for weeks. Don't you get lonely there all by yourselves? He smiled and his teeth were fantastic, strong and white. Of course not. I look my wife, I see the cosmos. I walked in the mountains, scrambling over the rocky land, gazing off into the blue sea. When I tired, I sat in the shepherd's unused cave to rest and feel the peace of the earth seep into my bones. Not the static, stultifying peace of the basement library in the university where the stern librarian forbade even a smile, but the vibrant, pulsating peace of the earth planet emits. Almost a tangible radiation. My nerves, tightly strung, softened. I felt less as each day passed. That urgent necessity to do, to make, to accomplish, to move, it was quite enough to be. To sit, to stare moodily off into the sea or up at the sky. To sit in silence with the old fishermen and the village housewives on the doorstep at the day's end and hear the bells tinkling through the hills as the sheep and goats came down for the night. There was a relationship between myself and the sun here in this little cove, between myself and the sea, between my soul and the earth on which I sat, or stood, or climbed, and the fire which boiled my potatoes and my rice, and the wind which whistled cold through the cracks in the door at night. I did live on a planet, and that planet was Earth, and that planet was my support, my base, the stage on which I strutted my bit. I liked the baby lambs the best. Their innocence took my breath away. When I was lucky, one of the shepherds would let me clasp the warm, furry little creature tightly, nuzzling my face in its wool. I never tired of watching them play. The baby goats were comic as well. The shepherds and the fishermen who spent long, lonely periods on the sea, in the mountains, had a mystic heart. They rose when the earth lifted them up, and they fell when she let them down. They moved involuntarily to her dance of seasons, her shifts of moods, her heavy rains, her powerful gusts of wind, her scorching sun, her famines and her harvests. These men, so silent, so still, sitting with straight backs on their chairs, leaning on their staffs, they had felt that same yearning. I knew it. As I chatted with them, patted their sheep, I thought they knew what I knew and felt what I felt. Yet they, like me, had not found that pole towards which their yearning could move, in which it could find fulfillment. They were as stoic as Socrates when he had put the cup of hemlock to his lips. Their minds were clear and sharp and understood the subtle postures of the questing spirit, though some of them couldn't read. They had a splendid sense of the dramatic and could make an entrance into the coffee house as soul-stirring as a great Shakespearean actor setting his foot as Hamlet or Julius Caesar upon a London stage. Their charming, childish naivety sprang from their basic innocence. I had picked up a few phrases in Greek and managed to carry on elementary conversations by studying one of the ubiquitous Greek to English everyday conversation books. I'd been studying one day, on the porch of our house, when I suddenly burst into guffaws and giggles. "What is it?" Marilyn had called from the kitchen. Being an active person by nature, she had funneled her energy into cooking scrumptious dishes, morning, noon, and night, over our open wood fire. "I'm studying my Greek and learning phrases for everyday conversation. And do you know what one of the first phrases in the book is?" I waited to make sure Marilyn was listening. "Can you believe this? An English phrase necessary for every Greek male over 10 and under 70 is, 'You are very beautiful. Will you marry me?'" I chuckled. I had wondered why every second man in the street in Athens had those words on his lips, and now I knew where they came from. Essential English phrases indeed. In the villages that could never happen. The men sat on one side and the women on the other, and never the twain did meet. Or if it did, it was discreetly behind a bush or over the nearest hill. It was sweet to see the subtleties of village courtship, the long side glances, the sudden flushes of red in the cheeks, the humbling self-consciousness by which young lovers silently communicated their messages of the heart. I and Marilyn had found something in Crete for which we had been starved. Like victims of beriberi treated with massive doses of vitamin C, our famished spirits fleshed out with contentment, our sense of time altered, our hearing, touching, tasting, smelling, and seeing were laundered by the vibrant colours of our natural surroundings, the primitive essentiality of our lives. The sun was not a small pale disk huddling between skyscrapers, but held iron sway over our activities, determining when we would rise, when we would work, and in its absence, when we would relax. The moon was no longer the object of poetic fantasies, but a useful substitute for the sun at night, which helped us climb over the narrow tracks, giving just enough light to negotiate the curves and the bends, and the sudden drops and twists mountain travel entailed. One didn't waste water when one had to pull it, bucket by precious bucket, from the village well and carry it to the house, nor did one forget the utility of fire when it was the sole means of rendering inedible roots and tubers edible. We discovered that we lived on a planet, a rather delightful orb, which had its own sacred scent, which gave sustenance to millions of diverse life forms clinging to its bosom. The earth was silent and strong, and when one lived intimately with its rhythms, gave support to the soul. Concrete, cement, neon lights, honking horns, plastic bags, paper sacks sucked the vitality out of human life. Those born to it knew not the reason for their angst, their life weariness, their ennui, and sought metaphysical causes in the maze of convoluted thought. Eventually they went mad, or had to. But farmers, fishermen, shepherds, people who lived directly with nature, didn't need a philosopher in an ivory tower to tell them the meaning of life. Words to them were nothing more than the chirping of sparrows, the bleating of sheep, noises of communion, a means of feeling oneness with others. Neither more nor less. They didn't take words seriously, nor did they wander much in verbal abstraction. That was a relief, especially to me. "Good morning," I would say each and every morning to Sophia, my next-door neighbour, as we set about our household chores. "How is your husband and the little one?" And Sophia would respond, asking the same questions, altered only to fit slight variations in the situation. After a month of such exchanges, I felt a closeness to Sophia I hadn't felt, even after months of daily discussions with my university colleagues, splitting hairs over Sartre, Camus, Kant, Hegel, Nietzsche, and Kierkegaard. After those intellectual discussions, I would rise with a heavy head and a terrible, desperate sense of futility. Oneness, that was the important factor, that sense of oneness with other human beings, with animals, with the planet, with the sun, the moon, the stars, the sea, and the mountains. Out of that oneness came the realization that one was never alone, could never be alone, for there was no reality in that loneliness. Loneliness was a falsehood, a trick of the self, like a small child burying its head in its pillow and thinking darkness had fallen for the whole world. Who could be a stranger on an earth planet throbbing with billions of interrelated, interdependent beings? Pluck a flower, disturb a star, made sense on this island, on this planet, in this village, where relationship was palpable, not just fashionable word describing an artificial psychological waltz of ego in society salons. That terrible scholar's schizophrenia I had developed in graduate school, splitting up the world into little verbal compartments and then piling them one on top of the other to explain the inexplicable, got the medicine it needed in Crete. Large doses of fresh air and sun, wide spaces with which to sweep clean the eyes, natural sounds to purify the ears, hard physical labour to restore the jaded taste. John had said to me when my morbidity had become unbearable, "Life takes us around our problems. You'll never solve them. Life will just take you around them." It was true. Here I simply went around many problems and left them where they belonged, in the dust. One morning when I woke up, I felt deliciously happy. I jumped out of bed, stretched, ran to the window, threw it open, and gulped in huge lungfuls of the sea breeze-laden air. It was a joy which had no object, an immense bliss which filled my being for no reason. I was afraid I would fly away like a helium-filled balloon, and my analytical mental conditioning pricked away with pins of doubt. But it was too late. I had really been taken around my problems. The meaning of life, the quest of the soul, my role in the universe, the existence of God and all that, they were still there, but suddenly those things didn't seem very important. It wasn't the answer to that I sought. It was what? What was it that I sought? At the summit of that exaltation, I felt the yearning without an object, without a pole. I had suffered so much, so often, when I was sitting on the banks of the Mississippi, on a carpet of autumn leaves, with the crisp, tangy, exhilarating smell filling my nostril. But that morning, along with the old yearning, was something else. Hope, the knowledge that fulfillment existed. In what form, in what place, when and where, I didn't know. But I took a leap of faith. Then, at that moment, facing the sparkling, optimistic light refracting off the blue Mediterranean waves. And though I didn't know what I was seeing, I had faith at that moment, a faith that was abiding. From that moment onward, that I would find it. It would become part of me. It was possible, and that was the beginning of a new joy. I had giggled at the detached and witty English, had admired the efficient Germans, had been somewhat awed by the arrogant French, but I loved the Greeks. Their passionate involvement with everything from the meal they were about to enjoy, the journey they were about to undertake, the new shoes they were about to buy, enveloped me in its vivacity. I loved the music, the food, the dances, the simplicity, especially in villages like the one we had spent the winter. There was still a dignity, a nobility in their behaviour, in the manner in which they interacted, one with the other. Their daily talk was laced with philosophical gems. Their ancient civilization had reached high tide thousands of years ago, and now had ebbed. Still, vestiges of the nobility of that thought, the questing spirit, remained. Their culture was old now, and past its prime, like an old hag who, toothless and hairless, was preparing for her funeral pyre. Still, even in the old woman's decay, one could see the lines, the delicate bone structure which had been the essence of her beauty. But for all the qualities, the Greek philosophers had not reached the summit. Their ancestors had searched mainly in mind for answers to existence. They had sought the ideal with poor tools, with verbal constructs which, however lofty, remained castles in the air. They had not gone as far as the Orientals, who realized eventually one had to leave behind even the mechanism of the mind. How can a mouth eat itself? Yes, how indeed? How could the mind fathom its own depths? The Greeks soared far, yet were bound by a golden chain, the chain of thought and its manifestation in the spoken and the written word. Restlessness was an underlying curse of the race, a dis-ease which forced the beautiful Greeks to spring up, throw their arms wide as though ready to be crucified on an invisible cross, start to dance and move in the wildest manner, breaking plates, shouting, singing in loud voices, any popular cinema song. That restlessness pricked their male pride and caused them to rub aggressively against each other, sparking wild orgies of violence which flared up in the dark night and left smouldering ruins to greet the sun. We are a passionate people, they would shrug their shoulders the morning after, as though that could explain the broken chairs and tables and bandaged heads and limbs. Even those who had wide open spaces in their souls, the shepherds who lived alone in their caves in the mountains for weeks on end, who could sit for hours staring at the sea with nothing but a small glass of the harsh Turkish coffee before them, even those men had still that restless irritation, which flared up in uncontrolled bursts of temper or smouldered like a soul ache in the middle of their hearts. The ancient Greeks had not gone far enough. They had stopped too soon, I felt. But they had explored their feelings, their passions, and had tried to sublimate them into lofty thoughts and artistic renderings in myriad forms. In that tiny little village where the sun was bright and warm and the vegetables and fruits had the taste of a mineral-rich soil and not the plastic coating of artificial fertilizers and preservatives, even there the principle of the grass is greener on the other side held sway. In a fit of nostalgia one night in the village cafe, I had taken out photos of my family and spread them on the table. Immediately I was surrounded by curious faces, poking, pushing, grabbing, shoving. Who's that? What's her name? What does he do? Does he have children? Short staccato questions rent the air. I tried to sweep all the photos back up, like a triumphant gambler who won his hand. But Socrates had grabbed one and would not give it back. He held it in his hands, gazing at it gazing at it and cradling it as though it were a small baby. I love you. You are so beautiful, he said in his thick Greek accent. Will you marry me? He spoke softly to the photo, with passion. I was astounded. Socrates had never spoken a word of English to me before. Then I remembered the first phrase in my Greek to English essential conversation book. He must have picked up the phrase from that. After that evening, Socrates pestered me day and night. He made up his mind that he was in love with my sister, Mary Lou, the lovely young girl in the photo, and none other would do for him. He would parade in front of me, hugging the photo to his heart. Give me that picture, I would snap, and try to snatch it away, but he was too quick. You can't marry her. Why not? I will go to America and we will live there forever, she and me, he said. First of all, Americans don't get married like that, I would say in exasperation. You have to know each other a long time, go out together, find out whether you like each other. You're her elder sister. You tell her to marry me. I'm a nice Greek boy. That's what we do here. Our fathers and mothers tell us who to marry, and we do it. You tell her. I gave up explanations and tried another tack. Look, you are so lucky to live here. You have a good life, plenty to eat, the sun, the earth, the moon, the mountains. If you go to America, you'll hate it there, with noise and cars and big buildings and ugly concrete all over. Socrates would shake his head very seriously. No, I don't like it here. There is nothing for me. Even if I work very hard, I don't get any money. I don't have anything. I don't want to live my life like this. I want to go to America. I want to marry your sister. I took a last stab. But you don't speak English. You can't manage. What will you do? That was simple. I'll learn. I'll go into a coffee house, sit down and say, please give me one coffee. That was only the second phrase I'd ever heard him speak in English. We always communicated in my broken Greek. Day by day, I'll learn new words. I'll learn English. No problem. I never got the photo of Mary Lou back. Socrates became less persistent, but visibly annoyed with me. He was certain I was deliberately blocking his marriage with my sister, and could see no reason for it. Most of the villagers thought America was a heaven across the sea. Most would have given their eye teeth to go there. They had something money couldn't buy, and yet they wanted money, and if they ever did get a chance to get that money, they'd be off searching like me for things that money couldn't buy. The human race has a perverted streak. Somewhere in the line of evolution, mankind has taken a wrong turn.